Now, in today's lesson, we're going to be going over King Herod the Great. The name Herod comes up again and again in the New Testament from Matthew 2 to Acts 26. So, from the very beginning of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all the way up until the end of the book of Acts, we read about King Herod. So, you must think Herod is 100 years old. Not so much. It's referring to the Herodian dynasty. And if you are studying anything in the New Testament, I believe that it is vital for you to know the distinctions between these Herods. Herod is the family name of a ruling dynasty in ancient Israel. First of all, Herod was born in 73 BC. His birthplace was in that of Idumea or Edom, the southernmost part of Judea. His father was an Edomite named Antipater. Though Herod's ancestry was Edomite, he was a practicing Jew. In 63 BC, roughly 10 years after Herod was born, in 63 BC, the Roman general Pompey conquered Jerusalem and its surroundings. That was the year that Rome took over Israel. Herod's father, Antipater, and whom became a prominent man through his marriage to his wife and whose family was quite wealthy, I suppose. Herod's father, Antipater, supported Pompey's campaign, supported the Romans, gaining a long-lasting influence among the Romans. As a side note, it's also important to note how in 59 BC, shortly after Pompey conquered Israel, in 59 BC, Julius Caesar was rising in power. Caesar also favored Antipater and his family. About a decade after that, around 15 years after Rome or Pompey had conquered Israel, in 48 BC, Caesar was appointed as dictator of Rome, naming Mark Antony his second in command. Now, all of this is very important, especially Mark Antony. And by this point, Rome has already had its civil war, and the dust is kind of settling from that. Pompey has been assassinated in Egypt. Caesar had the assassins killed. All of these things had already taken place by this point. The next year, though, right away, in 47 BC, Caesar appointed Antipater procurator of Judea and conferred on him Roman citizenship, an honor that descended to Herod and his children. Herod himself, who would have been in his mid-20s at this time, 47 BC, Herod made his political debut in the same year, 47 BC, when his father appointed him governor of Galilee, where Jesus would later roam primarily. This is where Nazareth and all of these were. By that point, Herod was about 26 years old and had began a lifelong friendship with Mark Antony. So you can see the power structure around them. The second in command over all of Rome was basically best friends with Herod. In 40 BC, the Parthians from the east, this mighty empire of the Parthians, invaded Israel. Civil war broke out, and Herod was forced to flee to Rome. While in Rome, the Senate there nominated him king over all Judea and equipped him with an army to solidify that position. Go back, conquer them. Now, this would take a few years before he could actually make that concrete that he was the king of Judea. After about 3 years of fighting in the year 37 BC, at the age of 36, Herod became the unchallenged ruler of Judea, a position he was to maintain for 32 years, which would be right up until the year of Christ's birth, literally. Herod endowed his realm with massive fortresses and splendid cities, such as Caesarea, right along the border. If you'll remember, Paul the Apostle was taken there at trial. We'll get into that in the next study. But yeah, he's the one that built up Caesarea. Very important part of the New Testament as well as ancient Israel, which would later on become the capital of the Roman province in 6 AD while Christ was growing up on earth. But Herod loved to build, and his most grandiose creation was the temple. Herod's temple, which he wholly rebuilt. Now, it's very important to understand Herod did not build the second temple. It had already been built hundreds of years before, after the Babylonian captivity, by Zerubbabel. But he built upon it, making it even more grand than Solomon. The work of rebuilding the temple began in 19 BC, the 18th year of King Herod's reign, and he wanted to really build up this temple to please the Jewish people. In general, the vast project was completed in 10 years, the general rebuilding of it, but the work of decoration was not finished until 64 AD, in which it would be destroyed in 70 AD. In his own kingdom, he could not give full rein to his love of magnificence. He couldn't do exactly what he wanted for fear of offending the Pharisees, the leading faction of Judaism, in whom argued with Christ all along. Paul the Apostle, or Saul of Tarsus, was one of these before his conversion to Christianity. But due to these Pharisees, in whom he constantly argued with, he was quite restricted in Israel from doing all that he wanted because they regarded him as a foreigner, being an Edomite. Unfortunately, there was a dark and cruel streak in Herod's character that showed itself increasingly as he grew older. He had great paranoia. His mental instability, moreover, was fed by the intrigue and deception that went on within his own family. Herod always feared potential rivals to his power. He had his wife's brother, Aristobulus the high priest, drowned in the swimming pool in his palace. He put to death 46 members of the Sanhedrin, the religious governance in Israel. He killed his mother-in-law. He also had his wife Mariamne murdered, along with 2 of their sons, as he considered them potential rivals with legitimate claim to the throne because of their Hasmonean lineage. Besides Doris and Mariamne, Herod had 8 other wives, and had children by 6 of them. He had 14 children in all. He was in great pain and in mental and physical disorder. He altered his will 3 times, and finally disinherited and killed his firstborn Antipater, in whom he likely named after his father. So cruel was King Herod that the great Augustus Caesar, the Roman emperor, actually can be quoted, "It is better to be Herod's dog than one of his children." The gospel accounts themselves even record the wickedness of this King Herod the Great. Shortly before his death, Herod was visited by wise men from the east. We're not told how many, but he was visited by these wise men from the east, claiming to be seeking the promised king of the Jews. Now that was Herod's title, and due to his paranoia and jealousy over losing his power, he didn't care if it was the Messiah or not, the promised Messiah. Remember, he's an Edomite, so he has no real investment within the throne of David itself. He just wants to keep the throne for himself. And as we all know, Herod then inquires of the law and prophets, those in whom were very well learned in the Old Testament as we know it today. He says, well, is this the prophesied king of the Jews, the Messiah, the anointed one? They then tell him how he was supposed to be born in the same place as King David, Bethlehem. Herod then directed the men to Bethlehem, according to the old prophecies, and told them to seek the promised king diligently, then return and tell him so that he could also come and worship him. But we know Herod, he's insane by this time. After the wise men found the baby in Bethlehem, they were warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod. Matthew 2:16 tells us, "Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceeding wroth." Mocked in the sense that they wouldn't come back to him as he had ordered. He was exceedingly wroth, very, very angry, and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem and in all the coasts thereof, not just Bethlehem, but the surrounding areas, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. And right here, one can clearly see the hand of Satan at work, just as in the times of Jezebel. Satan had always tried to destroy the Jewish people through the Assyrians and the Egyptians at times, and always has targeted the Jewish people, knowing the prophecy that the Messiah was to come through not only that of Israel, not only from the seed of Abraham, but also through Judah, and more specifically through the seed of David. So if you'll remember Athaliah, Jezebel's daughter, how she tried to annihilate the seed of David, Satan's hand being at work then, trying to destroy the royal seed. So do we now see, right before Christ's birth, Satan in a desperate attempt to annihilate this coming Messiah to the world. He now tries to, through King Herod the Great, kill all the babies in Bethlehem. Don't leave any of them. This is a desperate attempt by Satan to thwart this plan. The Encyclopedia Britannica even can be quoted stating this about Herod: the slaying, shortly before his death, of the infants of Bethlehem was wholly consistent with the disarray into which King Herod had fallen. This even matches his historical character that we read outside of the Bible. Not long afterward, Herod died in Jericho, and I mean not long at all afterwards. I would even say just a matter of months later. Not long afterward, Herod died in Jericho after an excruciatingly painful, putrefying illness of uncertain cause. We're not really sure how he died, we just know it was excruciating. The ancient historian Flavius Josephus states that the pain of his illness led Herod to attempt suicide by stabbing, and that the attempt was thwarted by his cousin. Josephus also stated that Herod was so concerned. Now just listen to this. This is how maniacal this man was. Herod was so concerned that no one would mourn his death that he commanded a large group of distinguished men to come to Jericho, men of high rank, and he gave an order that they should be killed at the time of his death so that the displays of grief that he craved would take place. His brother-in-law Alexis and his sister Salome did not carry out this wish. King Herod was born in 73 BC and he died about 4 BC, the same year that we believe Christ was born. So right after this massacre of the innocents, literally, I would say just a month or just a few months later, did he die.